with you. Kind of lay this out for us. What's at play at this point? How is this shaping up? What will happen today?
Well, there's a lot of stuff in flux. So you basically have two pieces here. You have the legislative piece, which is, I won't even say it's for show. I think that, and I wrote yesterday, that there seems to be a growing, even maybe bipartisan consensus that what you need is new antitrust rules, kind of 21st century antitrust rules. That would come from Congress. But then you have the regulatory stuff happening in the back end with the FTC and the DOJ, who've kind of split up the big tech companies. And that's, if you're going to see anything like what we've seen in the EU with big fines, et cetera, that's the piece that's going to come from, and that'll happen behind closed doors.
In terms of needing this to be kind of resolved, there's a few different directions that legislatures could take with this, that Congress could take. What are those scenarios, and what do you think is most likely?
I mean, the things they could do is they could basically try to take the old kind of Sherman antitrust and the Clayton antitrust and really try to define them for technology, or at least rewrite them in a way that things, for example, like data privacy is explicitly included. When you look at the way the rules are interpreted right now, when you look at anti-competitive behavior and how it hurts consumers, it's almost all in terms of price, and the price is considered dollars, right? You know, something costs more, therefore it's potentially bad for consumer welfare. Data isn't considered to be an actual cost. You could rewrite the rules to include it.
Dan, there is a little bit of a consensus out there that this is going to take years. We're not going to see anything that really comes through for several years. You think that's the case, too, right?
Yeah, I think that's the case. And also, by the way, just from a pure political calculation, you know, break up big tech is a really great thing to be able to say on the campaign trail.
Sure.
You don't have an election for another 18 months.
Sure. Gene, MoffettNathanson just upgraded Facebook this morning. They did this despite concerns about what's going to happen with global regulatory. And you also think that the headlines here are going to be worse than what actually happens at the end, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I would also caution that everything we're talking about, like you said, is going to take years to work out. These headlines will likely weigh on some of these stocks, and particularly Google and Facebook, which is going to be at the center of today's House Judiciary Committee, really helping legislators understand. But the more rhetoric that we hear out there, that's typically not good for the multiple. I do have some concerns about Facebook longer term. I do think that Google is well positioned longer term, but nonetheless, Google is probably at the greatest risk over the next 2 years related to different practices in terms of specifically how they display search results.
Why do you think Google's most at risk?
Well, if you look at 90% of their business is search, and search is impacted by the ranking that they show the results. And Google historically has put their own rankings ahead of other competitors. I think a perfect example would be a search for a restaurant. Typically, Google Maps shows up as the primary result. So things like that are easy for regulators to wrap their heads around. And I think ultimately how this could play out is some sort of shift in the algorithm of Google that could better and more fairly, if you will, rank some of these results, which could obviously impact monetization. Again, I want to stress, I don't think that this will have a material impact on the business, but I do think the headlines will have a measurable impact on Google's multiple over the next year.
Which means you do what? If the stock is under pressure, would you buy it at those times?
So I think this separates the investors from traders. I think traders, there's really nothing to do with Google. I would just stay away for the next year or so, because I think that these are material questions that investors are going to ask. I think if you have the better perspective of owning things for the next 3 to 5 years, Google continues to be the oxygen of the internet. I think this company will prevail, whether it's around search or other bets, autonomy, all the great things that they're working on the side. So it depends on what your time horizon is, but very different action steps based on those time horizons.
Dan, if competition law and antitrust law is rewritten in order to address this broader issue for the tech stocks and the way in which these businesses have changed, are there any other sectors that will be impacted by that as a second derivative effect, and which sectors do you think could be most affected?
Well, obviously, it depends on how they get rewritten, because there's really two choices here, right? You either write something that's very specific for tech and for tech platforms. For example, you see what Elizabeth Warren's proposed in terms of marketplaces. That's really tech specific. But more broadly, if you look at the U.S. economy and U.S. corporate economy, consolidation, big consolidation, kind of duopolies or even monopolies, you see that in healthcare. You see that in big agriculture. You see it across the board. So I think ultimately, if Congress really wants to take this on, the question is, are they going to be real narrow with tech? And I think they could be, right? They could just go with tech, or they're going to do something which is much broader, which honestly makes more sense if you're trying to rewrite antitrust law.
Dan, the privacy issue, I was wondering what you were going to say, because I think of antitrust, I think of consumers. I don't want to go the European route where every new competitor needs to have, oh my gosh, you're hurting a competitor. Well, you're an entrenched company that has a moat and you're really good, and that's not our problem. The competitors can. So you said it would have to be rewritten in terms of privacy. Why would it have to be antitrust? Couldn't you address the way that we're not compensated for all the information? Can you do that some way around that didn't involve antitrust? Stick with antitrust the way it is. I mean,
you could leave it. You could leave it, as I said. And to be honest, Joe, I think the way you do that is, in answer to Wilf's question, is: are you going to write something that's tech specific, or are you going to look at antitrust broader? Because again, Joe, there is this broader question. You look at healthcare, you look at big agriculture. Right. The consolidation on there and the pricing pressure is real. If you're going to go specifically at tech, yeah, absolutely, you could write a privacy law.
Because I don't feel violated. I mean, I've talked about it with privacy. That's one thing. I'm not on Facebook, so they're not stealing all my data. But everything's free. I just, I don't want to change antitrust.
Well, it depends how you define free, right? That's the question, right? Are you paying dollars, or are you giving them something else in exchange?
I just look at the whole inflation picture and just the world we're living with Amazon and transparent pricing everywhere, and it's just such a, we really do look at all this stuff and don't even appreciate how much it's changed our lives and held down inflation and been a positive. And to be looking at it and say, wow, we got to do something about this. There's, let's see. There's, you got to search to find something that's really right. That's why I think Elizabeth Warren is I think that whole approach is misguided.
Joe, can I just say one thing, Joe?
Yeah.
The question is, there's two sides of pricing, right? So, Facebook and Google are free for you and me to use, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, they're getting paid by companies which are advertising on them. Are we ultimately, and this will be a question for regulators, are we ultimately paying on that back end when we buy that product who paid Google and Facebook? Are we charged more because of what they're having to pay those companies?
No, it's cheaper because we're buying it on Amazon, and they've driven down prices. So it's, the whole ecosystem is an advantage for consumers. Now, for competitors, then we're headed down what I think is an ill-advised system that they use over in where Wilfred's from, among a lot of ill-advised things they do over there. Right, Dan?
Yeah, my fault.
I'll let you go with that, Joe.
I knew you would.
Gene, you think that Apple and Amazon, though, are relatively safe. Why is that?
Well, it really is the tale of two cities. It's easy to wrap all these companies together because they're large tech. But undoubtedly, Apple has been more progressive with their view that it really is about the device, and privacy has been a central theme for the company for the last 4 years. I think that narrative will play well with regulators. And Amazon is, even though they have a larger percentage of e-commerce, call it 20%, it still is far from a monopoly. And so I think that really when you think about this debate about regulation and large tech, you really need to break it into two camps. And Apple and Amazon are in the safer camp. Apple by far is the safest.